Hello and welcome to Committee Corridor. Everyone seems to agree. The water industry in England and Wales is in dire straits. The interim report from the Independent Water Commission says the water sector is failing and broken. The National Audit Office reports the scale of the challenge facing water regulators is huge. Under new powers, government has banned bonuses this year for 10 water company executives in England over serious sewage pollution. The House of Commons Environment, Food and Rural Affairs Committee has called out the irresponsible owners, poor leadership, low investment and ineffective prioritisation in the sector, which has left customers to bear the brunt. And consumer trust in the water industry has hit an all-time low. I'm Toby Perkins, the Labour Member of Parliament for Chesterfield, and I chair the Environmental Audit Select Committee, the EAC, at the House of Commons. Water. We drink it, cook with it, wash in it. Some of the braver ones even swim in it. But England and Wales, the delivery and management of this precious resource is drawing the sharpest of criticism. Water policy is the responsibility of DEFRA, the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs. Private companies own and operate the entire water and sewage infrastructure in England. Later, we'll be joined by chairs from the EFRA and Public Accounts Select Committees to hear what happened when they dug into the detail and put questions to leaders at each of those organisations. But first, Feargal Sharkey, singer, environmentalist, campaigner. He's the chairman of Armwell Magna Fisher in Hertfordshire, the oldest fly fishing club in the UK still fishing the same water. And he joins me now. So Feargal, welcome to Committee Corridor. You've become one of the most prominent campaigners for our rivers and water quality. Tell our listeners how you came to join and indeed to lead this fight and why.
Oh, good Lord. The shortened version, when I was about 10, 11 years old, I developed a very unhealthy interest and passion for fly fishing, which has meant for the last 50 some odd years, I've spent far too much time standing next to rivers, waving bits of carbon fibre around my head, being treated with utter contempt by some very indignant little wild brown trout or salmon who's refusing to cooperate. That ultimately led to me becoming chairman of this incredible institution called the Armwell Magna Fishery, which is the oldest fly fishing club in the country. And the reason for that was we look after 2.5 miles of chalk stream in Hertfordshire on the River Lee, and that stretch of river was, to quote the technical terminology, suffering from eutrophication, but in plain English, it was turning into 2.5 miles of stagnant pond simply through lack of flow. That resulted in me engaging with a very wonderful charity called Fish Legal, who help fishing clubs and anglers take legal action against people like the Environment Agency. So we spent 1.5 years building up to take the Environment Agency to the High Court. Thankfully, in the end up, Toby, we managed to get our thing resolved quite quickly. And I'm oversimplifying this. It made me curious why 60 ladies of a certain age who simply want to go fishing on a Sunday morning had to take the Environment Agency to the High Court just to get them to do their job. And that gave me an itch. And stupidly, foolishly, naively, I scratched that bloody itch. And every time I scratched that itch, I just ended up with a bigger itch. Here we are, 5-6 years later. I had no idea of the journey that I was about to go on and what we were about to uncover.
And in 2024, 3.6 million hours of untreated sewage was discharged into waterways across England, even higher than last year. What's going on and what's the impact of that on our rivers?
Sticking to England, there is currently not a single river anywhere in England that is not polluted, and one of the largest sources of that pollution is the English water industry. That's the impact. What's going on? Quite simply, a combination of colossal, almighty failure of regulation and oversight of the industry, and an industry that for far too long has been gaming the system to their advantage. Now, by that, what I mean, as we speak, water companies have now paid their shareholders somewhere in the region of about £84 billion worth of our money, while saddling these companies with £84 billion in debt. As we speak, as we've discussed, every river in England is polluted. These water companies leak colossal amounts of water every day. And quite simply, neither the sewage system nor indeed London's water supply in the southeast, because it's the other thing now that's come to the fore. London in the southeast is now on the cusp of running out of drinking water simply because we have not invested enough, or the industry hasn't, in reservoirs, supply, and securing that 25 million people can continue to use water the way we have done in the past.
Yeah, and we'll come on to the infrastructure in a minute, Feargal. But Sir John Cunliffe was appointed by government to lead the Independent Water Commission. Right at the top of his recent interim report, he says that public trust in the water sector has been shaken. But you've been very critical of this interim report. What's wrong with it, and what should he be proposing?
Well, quite frankly, we were given endless discussions before the election, during the election, after the election, that there would be a full root and branch review, a complete strip down of the operation and the functioning of the entire industry and its oversight, or to quote, a complete reset of the industry. John, I have to say, I think I came up with the expression Sir John Cunliffe had been Sir Humphrey'd. It's a classic thing where we have now so narrowly defined the terms of reference. And let's face it, the Commission can only act within its terms of reference, but the terms of reference now very clearly and succinctly focuses solely and exclusively on regulation and bringing investment into the industry. That's not what everybody thought they were getting. Or to put it another way, we were promised champagne, and now all we've been offered is sour milk.
Yes, and I mean, in terms of reference, he was prevented by the government from considering public ownership of water in his remit. What's your sense as to what actually needs to happen in our water industry?
Well, I think Thames Water has clearly now become the poster boy of all of this. In my personal opinion, Thames, like the rest of the industry, is certainly morally, if not operationally and institutionally bankrupt. Thames, as we know, is now £20 billion in debt. It simply can't even afford to service its own debt, never mind carry out the level of investment that we need from it. There was a preferred bidder who pulled out of the deal.
Yep.
And everybody's now scrambling around looking for a plan B. Ofwat have come up with this ridiculous idea that in their mind, Thames Water is worth £21 billion. But as we now know, KKR, the VC fund that pulled out last weekend, were merely offering 4, and they clearly thought that was too much. I think ultimately right now, government is going to have to bear down on this, and Thames Water needs to be put into special administration. Right now, the vast majority of this industry, if not the whole industry, actually now needs to be taken back into state control.
Well, water isn't privatised in Scotland or Northern Ireland, but pollution isn't limited to England, whether it's blue-green algae in Loch Ness or in Scotland, where there's been more than 2,000 complaints. Welsh Water, as we know, are a not-for-profit cooperative, and they're around the middle of the table on environmental performance. Do you think that some would say nationalising water is a bit of a red herring, and really the problem is a lack of investment over many years, whether it be those state-run companies or whether it be the private sector?
Well, let me step through this for you. You are right in terms of environmental performance. Neither of the 4 nations are any better than each other. And in Wales, clearly environmental regulation is delegated to the four nations. So in Wales, it's National Resources Wales, clearly another failed regulatory system. In Scotland, it is the Scottish Environmental Protection Agency, again, failed. Northern Ireland, believe it or not, doesn't actually have an arm's length independent environmental regulator. So the commonality there is failed regulation. So we're all agreed the regulatory system has failed. My basic thing at this point in time, after long consideration, we have given these guys all of the money they ever needed to do their jobs. Now, Ofwat has confirmed this. The water companies acknowledge it. In England and Wales, water companies have a statutory obligation to build and operate and maintain a sewage system, and now I'm quoting, capable of effectively dealing with the content of those sewers. That's what the law requires of them. That's what they've signed up for. That's the job they were given.
And is it time then to scuttle the regulators? Should anything be salvaged?
Oh, I think the regulators both, and bear in mind we've got two directly involved in this. Ofwat, the economic regulator, the EA, the environmental one. I think both are institutionally dysfunctional, discredited, and incompetent. And I think you're right. The whole regulatory system needs to be torn apart and rebuilt, because what's going on for 30, 35 years now has clearly failed the environment. Just think of that simple idea again, Toby. We live in a country where there is not a single river that is not polluted, and one of the biggest sources of that pollution is the water industry. That is not a regulatory system that needs tweaking. It needs abolishing and rebuilding.
Yeah, and what will it take to restore your trust and the public's trust here, Feargal?
The simple truth of the matter is, and I say this to government, and I will put my cards on the table, as you well know. I'm a card-carrying member of the Labour Party. I think we need to move away from the sloganising and the trying to capture headlines, and we need to get into the root and branch review we were promised, and we need to actually look at the financial structure, ownership and functioning of these companies, and we need to redesign and deliver a regulatory system that works both for those companies, for the environment and for customers. And at the minute, we're getting none of the above.
So you said there that you have been communicating, I know you have, with the Labour Party on this. And when you're speaking to Steve Reed, what are you shouting in his ear about the steps that he's taken so far and what he should be doing?
Well, the simple fact of the matter is, I think government now needs to actually develop the political courage to do this. I can understand why there's lots of nervousness and anxiety. Thames Water is the better part of £20 billion in debt. If all of that debt is lost and those bondholders lose all their money, might that have further implications on the bond market and indeed on UK PLC to draw investment? But here's where we are. Thames Water's going down anyway. People tell me, oh, it's going to cost £100 million or £100 billion to nationalise the water industry. It's simply untrue. That is founded on this notion that Ofwat have come up with, called technical language, regulatory capital value, and it turns out to be a completely fictitious, made-up number. And that number right now tells me that Thames Water currently, according to Ofwat, today is worth £21 billion. Well, clearly that's just an act of fantasy. So the truth is, we need an open, honest conversation, and that is going to take somebody in charge with the desire, the ambition and determination and the political courage to really get stuck into this.
No, and security of supply isn't guaranteed. We're told there's a risk to customers from deteriorating or inadequate water infrastructure. A new reservoir hasn't been built in the last 30 years. The government have recently announced 2 new reservoirs. Do you think there needs to be a bigger focus on infrastructure, and who's got to pay for it?
Here's the thing. The current projection is by 2050, we will need to find about 5 billion litres of water a day extra. That's over 33, 34, 35% of the water we currently supply. It doesn't exist. We don't have it. And in fact, there are parts of London right now, where I live in North London, is currently projected to have possibly another 10 to 15 years worth of supply left. Yeah. Well, there's something to think about, Minister. when all those nice people in Hampstead are queuing up at a standpipe with their LaCruz pots and pans to get some water. How's that one going to work politically? The simple truth is, Toby, people have known this since the early 1960s. The earliest reference I can find is 1965. R.C. Walters, the leading hydrologist in the country, was warning government the chalk aquifer around London had been pumped almost to exhaustion. So we simply have not done the planning. Again, it was part of the failure of regulation. Privatisation was supposed to deliver exactly that kind of investment. It didn't happen. To secure London and the South East water supply, we might need anything between a dozen to 30 reservoirs built sometime in the next 20 to 30 years. It's an insane job that needs to be done. Now, ultimately, who's going to pay for it? Well, here's the way it works, Toby. We pay for it all anyway. I'm afraid the chief executive of Northumberland Water blew the whole thing wide open in front of the ERA Select Committee a matter of months ago. The money they're investing over the next 5 years, is that coming from the shareholders? No, it isn't. It's coming off the backs of customers. That's why your bill has just on average gone up 36%. And count yourself lucky you're not a Southern Water customer. Your bill's gone up anything up to 53%.
Yeah, now on Committee Corridor, we're always there to highlight the work of select committees. I know you've been supportive of select committee work on this in the past. The EFRA Committee have been looking in great detail and putting the water industry through their paces. What do you think select committees' role should be? What do they need to do next?
Well, I'm saying this and I'm mindful as we're recording this, the Public Accounts Committee right now have the water industry and the regulators in front of them. And a very good thing too. Were it not for the Select Committee, a matter of a month ago, the chairman of Thames Water sat there and said that they were having to pay senior staff a 50% bonus because the investors had demanded it. Turned out that was not the truth. And it was because of the Select Committee that all of that unravelled and all of that became known. It was because of the Select Committee, this notion, this mythology that water company shareholders are going to invest £104 billion over the next 4 years, 5 years. It was because of a Select Committee. We now know that's also not true. It's coming out of your bank account and out of mine. Or because, as my good friend George Monbiot puts it, the only non-leaky pipe a water company ever built was between customers' bank accounts and shareholders' pockets.
Very good.
Were it not for the Select Committees, big round of applause, massive job over the last 4 or 5 years. The Select Committees have been monumentally important in holding these people to account and drawing attention to the reality of the mess these companies have got themselves and their customers and bill payers and the environment into.
Yeah, well, if they've done a monumental job, and I agree with you, then so have you. You've absolutely been at the forefront of putting this in the public eye. Thank you so much, Feargal, for joining us on Committee Corridor.
That's incredibly kind of you. Thank you for the invitation. Pleasure's all mine. You guys in the Select Committees, bravo, well done. Keep up the good work.
Thanks very much, mate. Cheers. Reform of the water sector is already a priority for government. Water companies in England and Wales have faced stern criticism for their handling of the issues, from confidence in our future to supply to threats including agricultural and sewage pollution. The EFRA Committee has been questioning the leadership of 10 of these water and sewerage companies, and it's published a report on these interactions. The committee is chaired by the Liberal Democrat Member of Parliament for Orkney and Shetland, Alistair Carmichael, who joins me now. Well, Alistair, thank you for joining us on Committee Corridor. Unusually for a select committee, the recommendations in your report are aimed at the Independent Water Commission, not the government. Explain why.
We have done a fairly thorough job here. I like to think we've had in-depth sessions with no fewer than 10 of the water and sewerage companies. Fairly blunt sessions from time to time as necessary. And we have now pulled together what we have heard from them, the conclusions that we have reached about the problems, and essentially our report, instead of being a report to the government, is our submission to the Cunliffe Commission. And it will be for him then to take what we do and indeed any other information that he has gathered from his own inquiries and then come back with his recommendations. Once we've done that, we will, of course, revisit it. We will want to speak to John Cunliffe. We want to speak to the department. For at the moment, the purpose of this report is just to lay out, red in tooth and claw, exactly how bad things are in the water industry.
Yeah, and your report, I think, speaks for many people when you call out the sector's culture as having lost its way and sense of purpose as custodians of the public good. Can you explain what it was that enabled you to come to that conclusion?
Time after time, you find this. The sector as a whole, bluntly, has completely lost the focus on what it is there to do, to provide water and sewage services for the general public. Now, as a utility that everybody relies on, this should be an industry that attracts investors who are looking for a low reward and turn for low risk, and that's what it is, because no water company is ever going to be able to fail in the conventional sense of the term. But they really have gone beyond that, and they have evolved these very complex corporate structures. All their bonuses and all their performance payments relate not to the provision of water services, not to their environmental improvements, but to debt management. And to my mind, that just illustrates how badly wrong things have gone here. There was one point where I think he was the CFO, the Chief Finance Officer of Southern Water, to list the various subsidiaries of which he was also Chief Finance Officer. And there are no fewer than 15 of them. And in fact, in order to list the companies that he was CFO of, he had to pick up a list of them that he had in front of him. If you cannot remember the names of the companies of which you are Chief Finance Officer, then you have to know that something has gone badly wrong with the corporate structure and the governance that you've got. It's overly complicated, and it loses the focus which ought to be on customer service and environmental protection.
Now, John Cunliffe wasn't able to consider models of ownership in his interim report, but I know your committee has made recommendations on this front. What were those recommendations on the issue of ownership?
Well, in fact, in terms of ownership, it's not us pointing to a hard model that we say this model is better than that one or the other. Effectively, what we do is we lay out the different options that there are there. The government has said that state ownership is not on the table, so frankly, there was no real point in spending an awful lot of time at this stage in proceedings making a case for that. But even within private ownership, there are not-for-profit models, there are mutual models, and you can see even around the United Kingdom the way in which some of these different models play out. You've got the model that you have in Wales, which has it's had its benefits, but in terms of outcomes, there are still some of the same outcomes there. And even in Scotland, where you have full state ownership, the environmental and the customer service outcomes are not always as good as they could be. I think it takes it back to this fundamental truth, and it is that you can have any model of ownership that you choose, but actually if your industry as a whole doesn't have the wrong culture, if you lose the focus on the customer service and environmental protection, then you're always going to end up with bad outcomes. And really that's where it brings you back to the question of the regulator, because the regulator really ought to be the body that is charged with keeping the feet to the fire of the companies, however they're going to be owned and constituted, on these fundamental basic functions.
Yeah. Now, I mean, turning to the failure on the regulatory system, what was the key learnings from your committee's report about how the water companies are regulated?
At its core, there is insufficient power and authority for the regulating bodies, rather. There's also, I've got to say, a fairly littered landscape. So you've got Ofwat, you've got the Environment Agency, you've got the Office of Environmental Protection, you've got the Drinking Water Inspectorate. Everybody's got a bit of skin in the game, and then when things start to go wrong, it's too easy for somebody to say, well, that's not really our job, it's theirs. So I think, the regulatory system that was set up at the time of privatisation was set up with an expectation that this would be a fairly benign, easily regulated sector. I don't think they saw the coming of the financial institutions in the way that they did. Southern Water is now owned by Macquarie. Thames Water were previously owned by Macquarie, and Macquarie were fairly bluntly blamed by the current chief executive as being the author of much of Thames Water's current misfortunes. But the regulator doesn't seem to see this as being something that should cause alarm bells to ringing. Again, within the regulators, I have a sense that there's just too much of a box-ticking culture here. So, we sit with our list of regulatory functions and we tick off each one as we feel we have performed it. We don't then take a step back at the end of it and say, well, this is what we have done. Is this good for customers? Is this good for the environment, for the cleanliness of our rivers and our chalk streams? Nobody seems to take that holistic view at the end of the day, and I think that is a consequence of the profusion of different regulators that you have in the industry.
Yeah, and where's DEFRA in all of this? I mean, the department's responsible for water policy. Do you feel that it's taking enough of a role, or is it sort of outsourcing responsibility to these myriad of different regulatory organisations?
The Water Spatial Measures Bill was aimed specifically at the targeting of bonuses and dividends, because again, one of the things that really annoys the customers at the end of the day is seeing they've got an outage, their infrastructure isn't fit for purpose, and their rivers are being polluted, and the people who are responsible for this are still there getting their bonuses, because their bonuses relate not to these sort of core customer functions, they relate to their debt management functions. The Water Spatial Measures Bill was intended specifically to stop that sort of thing happening, but yet in the last few weeks, as a consequence of the Select Committee's investigations, you have seen a fairly determined effort from Thames Water to get round that. So Steve Reid comes out, he says, no, this is unacceptable, it will not happen. And then it turns out actually that Thames Water have already paid the first tranche of performance payments, management payments as they call them. And on the one hand, DEFRA says, well, this has now been scrapped. But then when you ask Thames Water, they say, well, we're not paying it at the moment, but we regard it as paused rather than scrapped. So I think there is an obvious role for government in this, for DEFRA. And, when they see that attitude coming back from companies like Thames Water and bluntly probably others too, then it's up to them. At the end of the day, we all know the buck stops with the government.
Well, Alistair Carmichael, thank you so much for bringing us up to speed with the work that you're doing. Clearly an issue that is right at the top of the agenda and at the top of the public's set of priorities for this government. And we're very grateful for you joining us here on Committee Corridor.
Of course.
The National Audit Office is the UK's independent spending watchdog. It took an in-depth look at the challenges facing the water sector, the strength of the regulatory framework, and the impact on investors. On June the 9th, the Public Accounts Committee put those findings to leaders from DEFRA, the Environment Agency, and Ofwat. The committee is chaired by Sir Geoffrey Clifton Brown. He's the Conservative Member of Parliament for North Cotswolds, and he joins me now. Sir Geoffrey, we've been hearing the scale of the challenges facing the water sector. Your committee has been through the National Audit Office report. It's not easy reading. What shocked you the most?
It's not easy. to work out what was the most shocking. But I think that the drop in consumer trust, that's all of us, the water consumers, it's at an all-time low. And I'm not surprised it is, because we're in an environment where water bills are rising, storm overflows are increasing, regulators are not managing to ensure that the delivery plans are carried out. There's a need for more infrastructure to be installed to cover shortages of water in the next 25 years. So there are a number of really big challenges that the water industry faces. And I think what we're looking forward to seeing is Sir John Cunliffe's report into the whole water industry, making some fairly radical recommendations, some of which I think will be around regulation, because the regulation, particularly on these financial plans, they cover 60 documents and 200 pages. So they are horrendously complicated. So what we're seeing is an environment where the regulation, both in terms of the environment and in terms of finances, is not working in the consumer interest.
And you're right that the Sir John Cunliffe report will be of tremendous interest to all of us. One of the things that was raised by Feargal Sharkey in his earlier discussion was that the fact that nationalisation was off the table meant that, from his perspective, Sir John was starting almost with one arm tied behind his back. Do you have real confidence that the Cunliffe report will ultimately lead to recommendations, which will, if they're not going down the route of nationalisation, at least give us a meatier regulatory structure to work with?
Well, it's really important that his review does come up with clear recommendations, because, as you say, if we're not going down the nationalisation route, we need to provide a route whereby people are confident that they can invest in these water companies. Not only can they get a return, a reasonable return, but actually the water company is going to perform properly, carry out these financial plans, improve their environmental wastewater, improve the infrastructure of their assets. All of these things need to be done. Now, to do that, if it's not a privatized structure, it needs investment. And at the moment, as we're seeing with Thames, although Thames is an exceptional case, they are having great difficulty in finding that investment. And that is not a healthy place for any of us to be, that these companies can't conform to their obligations.
And I mean, that was their perspective. What's your sense from the conversations you had with the Consumer Council for Water, an independent voice for water consumers in England, about what the biggest concern was for customers?
Well, I think undoubtedly the biggest concern for customers is rising water bills. Rising water bills, they're going to rise by £31 every year, and plus inflation, which is an average increase of £123, or each 26% increase per household. So these water bills have become a significant part of our constituents' day-to-day household expenditure. I think there's a little bit of feeling, well, we've paid for a lot of this improvement, we've not got it, and yet we're having to pay again. And I think what the whole sector needs to do now is to be able to demonstrate that it can deliver and it can provide value for money for these water bills. And above all, it needs to explain to us, its consumers, why these bills have gone up so much and what they're spending the money on each year, and what improvements they've actually made in the year that we're spending our money on.
Now, the Public Accounts Committee has recently considered antimicrobial resistance. That also has an impact on the water sector, doesn't it? What did you find?
So this is a really important subject, antimicrobial resistance. If we don't pay attention to it, we could suddenly find that antibiotics do not work, and that the simple medical procedures which rely on antibiotics will start to fail, and we'll start to not be able to do medical procedures that we need to do. So one of the aspects of this is that quite a lot of that discharge goes into our water, out into our rivers and out into our seas, and of course pollutes those, and then we get animals and fish that are also consuming these antimicrobial resistant chemicals. So it is really important that we start to monitor that and pay attention to it in our water plan. And we will continue to ask DEFRA to treat wastewater as a potential health hazard. I mean, after all, people bathing in this water might well be ingesting some of this antimicrobial resistance. So this is an important aspect for humans and for animals, really, and we will continue to pursue that.
It sounds like a really important piece of work. Well, Sir Geoffrey, Feargal Sharkey was telling us about the important work that select committees have done in recent times, holding the water company to account. It's very clear that the work that your committee has done is absolutely a part of that. Thank you so much for coming on to Committee Corridor, telling us about the work of your committee, and we look forward to following it with great interest in the future.
Toby, it's very important that we explain to our constituents what these select committees do. So I'm delighted to be part of this programme.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So, my thanks to all my guests today. Committee Corridor is a real place running the length of Parliament from the House of Commons all the way to the House of Lords. When Parliament is in full flow, it's where you'll find committees at work asking the key questions of the key people on the key issues. Next time on Committee Corridor, we'll cast off from domestic waters to consider marine governance and what it means for the UK's environmental obligations. I'm Toby Perkins, and this has been Committee Corridor. Thank you so much for listening.